Greetings, my name's Guy Dauncey, and this is the show Change the World, where I like to bring on guests who are sharing my passion for building a better world, to bring more kindness to the world, more compassion, more cooperation. And my guest today is Todd Litman. I've known for a long time. Todd is a total transportation geek, specialist, nerd, really drilling the numbers and really making a difference in the world. Todd is the founder and executive director of the Victoria Transportation Policy Institute. He's also a cyclist, an avid cyclist, a lover of transit. And with your wife, Shoshana, you've also written 2 local books. Let me get this right. Washington Off the Beaten Path and The Best Bike Rides in the Pacific Northwest. Do you prefer, if you've got a holiday, do you prefer a transit holiday with nice Airbnb or whatever, or a cycling holiday?
Well, I am multimodal, so I love using the combination.
Right.
Walking is, of course, the best way to interact with our local environment, so I love walking. Bicycling is also really nice.
Yeah.
And we actually can describe public transit as a sociable mode of transport. Yeah. There have been surveys asking people, during your last trip, did you have a positive interaction with other people? And inevitably, when it comes to sociability, public transit is the best. So, especially if you're traveling in another country or another city, it's really fun to take public transportation and just see how people interact.
I often hear the story that people come from Vancouver even, and they're on Victoria buses, and they're shocked that everyone thanks the driver on the way out.
That's right. So it is. It's in many ways, public transit is supports positive interaction. You're sitting next to people who you don't know for a few minutes each day, and that can be very positive.
Well, some of us enjoy talking to strangers, myself included. Others are totally like, don't talk to strangers kind of thing. But if I throw a piece in that'll help us with this, in terms of the wealth in a community that's a social wealth, which is primarily premised on us talking to each other, right? Mm-hmm. In the old days, before traffic, we were on the streets, everyone would talk to everyone, right? Mm-hmm. Because and once you pass someone, say, hi Todd, I'm Guy. I'm never going to pass you again without just saying something. If I pass you as a stranger, it's neither here nor there. So walking brings the most social interactions, followed by, as a cyclist, you can still stop and chat to someone. In Ireland, if you're driving a car, or a horse cart, you can stop and chatter and block the road up. But here, you can't stop and chatter. So
that's right.
The more human walking or cycling or transit, the relationships, the bigger the social wealth, right?
That's right. So there's a technical term for it.
Oh, right. Of course, you would always have a technical term.
Community cohesion, which refers to the positive interactions that people have in a neighborhood. There's pretty good research based on asking people, do you know your neighbors? Have you had positive interactions with your neighbors? How many neighborhood or community activities do you engage in regularly? Do your children go to participate in a neighborhood school where you get to know, where you build these kind of relationships? And it's very clear that the key to community cohesion is the keys are good walkability, local parks and schools, and dogs, pet dogs, because people who have a pet dog,
it gets the conversation going right off the top.
Pet dogs in particular are a machine for exercise. They're a machine for day-to-day walking. Right, And so, yes, there is good research showing that if you live in a compact, walkable neighborhood, what I call an urban village, that you're much more likely to be involved with your neighbors.
There's 2 people from Vancouver, you'll know their names, I've forgotten them, and they're transportation people, and they moved to a town in Holland. Right. You know their names, right? It'll come to you probably. And they wrote a book about their experience, and how all the residential streets where the children used to play, then they lost that because of cars, and they've slowed the cars down to 5 miles an hour, and the kids are playing, and the kids can cycle everywhere. And they said, this is a great place to be a parent because the kids get more independence, they can cycle wherever they go, they make lots of friends. And when I'm back at home, I'm talking to the neighbors like, oh my God, they said, what a difference it makes in a whole town or city that's been designed around walkability and cycling.
Absolutely. So, Guy, do you pay extra for free-range eggs when you're shopping for eggs? Are you willing to pay a little more for a free-range egg?
We always try to. We assume $5 a dozen or $6 a dozen these days, since normally locally grown.
But you would prefer that your eggs be laid by chickens that are free-range.
Yes, totally.
Okay.
Totally. Always.
So when you're shopping for a house, if you were a parent, would you want to be willing to pay a little extra so your children can be free-range children?
Well, I can tell you a difference from that. Same thing. I live up in Cedar, a rural area, and there's a particular road, Barnes Road, that's got an S-bend in it. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a woman who moved there from the Lower Mainland, thinking she was coming to an area that was rural and quiet, where the kids could get around and walk. On that S-bend, the car's treated like a chicane. How fast can they go? Yeah. She says she cannot ever let her child out of the front gate because the traffic is dominating and there's no safe cycling lane or pedestrian paths. So totally, It's really important for parents.
Absolutely. And when real estate professionals, real estate organizations survey people asking what kind of neighborhood do you want to live in, consistently, walkability is the most important, or one of the most important aspects. Yeah. What's interesting is that we know what kind of neighborhood is walkable. It's short blocks with sidewalks on all the streets, and relatively narrow streets with good crosswalks.
It's the places people love to go on holiday to. It's the Florence and Barcelonas of the world, right?
Pretty much any neighborhood that was built before 1950.
Right.
Before automobiles became so dominant.
Right.
Any older neighborhood has those features.
Yeah.
But between, say, 1970 and about the year 2000, we weren't building that type of neighborhood anymore. So most of the development that occurred between 1960s or 70s and the year 2000, almost all of it was very automobile-dependent sprawl, which was not designed to support walkability. So there are neighborhoods that meet those.
Well, I live outside Ladysmith, which is a very tight little compact town, and you can walk around for everything. Yeah. And I was in Souk last weekend, and I'm looking around Souk. I think it's all cars and parking lots, and like, where's the center? Where's the
right? So Souk is a classic case where it's a town that evolved around a highway.
Yeah.
And so most of the street design and location, business location, was really highway oriented. Yeah. Now, to Souk's credit, the city has done a pretty good job of calming the highway. Yep. The speeds are a little bit lower. Yeah. But it still is not, as you say, it's not a pleasant place to walk. Where an older neighborhood, a town, say a small town that grew up, or that developed during pre-1950s, such as Ladysmith, it is extremely walkable, and that downtown is very
And with
attractive.
those hills, you get really fit.
Well, that's
another story.
A good thing. That's a good exercise. So what is challenging is that currently our development policies, our transportation policies, our zoning codes are really designed to perpetuate sprawl. Yeah. So they limit the types of housing. They prohibit townhouses and multifamily housing in most locations. They favor wider roads, and they spend money on roadway expansions. And our practices mandate parking, and all of these things are based on the assumption that we would rather drive than walk. Yeah. And so there's a movement. It's called new urbanism, and we're working to redesign communities or to help communities evolve into being much more walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented, and therefore more sociable.
So let me jump to another theme I want to make sure we've got time to talk about, which is the new organization you've helped us set up with friends called Better Island Transit, and the issue of the Malahat and and getting from Victoria to Duncan and the whole Cowichan Valley. Because right now, there's a minimal bus service.
Almost nothing.
And everyone on the Malahat, every day the papers are full of something or other, someone complaining, let's put a bridge across the Saanich Inlet, let's do that huge, all these solutions, whereas the easy solution is decent transit, right?
That's what my research suggests. Yeah. So every few years, I don't know if you've been following this for decades.
I've been following the Malahat for 30 years.
Okay,
yes.
And you know that about every 5 years, the legislature asks the Ministry of Transportation to commission a study looking at how we're going to solve the congestion on the Malahat. And so there have been about a dozen or a half dozen studies that have looked at this. And almost all of the analysis is based on the assumption that the only problem we're going to try and solve is delay to motorists. And so there's almost no what you would call multimodal analysis. That is asking, how could we improve the number of people rather than the number of vehicles? And so research by myself and a lot of other people suggests that when you have congestion, the most cost-effective solution is to provide very convenient and affordable public transportation. Right now, between Victoria and Duncan, so over the Malahat, there are only 4 buses a day, and they're all oriented toward people from Duncan, commuters from Duncan, traveling down in the morning, getting some work done, and traveling back in the afternoon. There's no reverse commute, there's no evening service, there's hardly any weekend service, and the fare from Duncan to Victoria is $10, which is 4 times
one way
each way.
So it's $20 a day?
Exactly, which is 4 times the standard fare.
Yes.
So Better Island Transit is proposing that that the province and the regional districts work to have at least hourly service between Victoria and Duncan. So the Route 66 between Victoria and Duncan should have at least hourly service, and the fares should be no more than twice a standard fare, so up to $5. And that would connect to the number 70 bus that goes from Duncan to Nanaimo. And so if the province takes our advice, we would have, it would be fast and affordable to get from South Vancouver Island, Victoria, up to Central Vancouver Island, that is Nanaimo and Cedar and all your community. It would take 3 hours and would cost $10 total.
And the other thing linked to this is, while driving a car, I've never been able to do any work or read a book or study or stuff like that. Whenever I am on a bus or a train or a plane, I get a huge amount of stuff done, whether it's reading a novel or actually working, because there's no other distractions. So if it takes longer, I'm actually getting stuff done in a big way.
That's right. So it's true. Public transportation generally takes a little bit more time, partly because you have to spend time walking to or biking to the station, the stop or station, and then waiting for the vehicle. So that's true, although in some ways, like you say, there's some positives. So that walk to the bus stop is exercise, and being on the bus, as you say, it is low stress, and it is you can be productive, and it is, for many people, it is far safer. Think of somebody, think of all the people in the Cowichan Valley, who many of them old or people with disabilities, who are being told they have to go to Victoria for some medical treatment, or maybe they just want to go for a show or something like that. Okay, but they know it's stressful for them to drive on the highway.
They're saying, I don't want to drive at night anymore.
Exactly.
And I don't want to drive the Malahat, so they certainly don't even think about going to a show in Victoria for those reasons.
That's right, which is a great deprivation. It's taking away the fun in life. So if we had hourly service on if the 66 bus had hourly service, it would be, and that means every hour between 6 in the morning and midnight, there would be a departure. That would mean you could travel down to Victoria, maybe run some errands, spend the evening eating and drinking at your favorite restaurant, go to a show, and still get home for a $10 round trip. You know, I'm on the Capital Regional District's Traffic Safety Commission, and we have all these campaigns to tell people, well, things like graduated driver's license for youth, so to reduce youth hazardous driving, special testing for senior drivers, and of course anti-drunk driving and anti-impaired driving and anti-distracted driving campaigns. But we have never said how, if we're telling you if young people shouldn't get a driver's license, old people should give up their driver's license, and after you drink, you shouldn't drive, we have not told them how they're going to get around.
Right.
And so we're turning it, we're making traffic safety a negative. We're saying you have to give up something.
Yeah.
But if we were to say we're going to invest more in quality public transit, and so, for example, somebody in Duncan could come down to Victoria and drink all they want and still safely get home,
Yeah.
everybody's better off.
So I hear people, I can picture our viewers thinking, going, well, that requires subsidies, right? But whenever a highway gets expanded or a new overpass is put in or new something, that's all paid for by our taxes. So we're subsidizing the highways all the time anyway, right?
Absolutely.
And
So-
anyone on a bus is actually taking cars off the road, and there's a benefit to all the other drivers.
That's right. So some of my research looks at what is the total cost of different forms of transportation, including external costs, subsidies.
Yes.
And public transit, you're right, buses and trains, they do receive subsidy, but so does driving. Like you say, the
Yes.
roads. Even bigger is the subsidy, the government mandated off-street parking spaces.
Right.
So every time somebody buys a car, they're expecting governments to build enough road space for them to drive, and they're expecting businesses to provide a parking space.
And they will complain if the parking is not there.
And they complain. It's assumed to be a God-given right. And most people have no idea what these things cost.
Yeah.
What do you think a downtown, what's the value, what's the annualized cost of providing an off-street parking space for a person?
On a
What do you
flat
think?
or in a parkade?
Well, that's a good point.
So
it varies.
on the flat, I'm thinking, well, that space could have had a 10-story building on it.
That's right.
And you've got 30 cars on it. I'm
land.
talking maybe
It's urban land.
$30,000 or something for the value of that space.
That's right. That's right. So if you think of it per space, here's one way to think of it. For most structured parking, the parking space costs more than the car that parks there.
Oh my goodness.
A structured parking space, so an underground
Yeah.
or on a
Yeah.
parkade, they now cost somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 per space.
Wow, yeah.
And they require ongoing maintenance. They need they have a certain life and they need maintenance. So when you take into account when many parking spaces are worth more, cost more than the vehicle that's occupying them. But we don't require businesses to give you a car, but we do require them to give a parking space so that those people who do drive can use it.
With all these jurisdictions, is there a gap in the planning process?
Absolutely. So the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, their job and their planning process and their funding is all oriented toward building intercity or interregional highways. So they're building a highway between Victoria and Sauk, or a highway between Victoria and Duncan, or between Duncan and Nanaimo. And BC Transit, their job and their planning process and their funding is all about local public transit. And there is nobody, no leadership, no agency that is responsible for providing public transit between regions. So there's been this gap for forever. I mean, it wasn't obvious until recently because you had private commercial companies, Greyhound and other companies like that, providing intercity, interregional travel. But they've gone bankrupt. And so the quality of service, the intercity transit service has collapsed. The industry has collapsed. And there are many of the highways in British Columbia, there is no bus service, there's no transit service, or it's very minimal. It's like a couple times a week.
Because we're an island, do we need an integrated island transportation authority or something like that?
Well, I don't care how it's structured, but I think it is very important that the Ministry of Transportation recognize that a highway that lacks transit service is not a transportation system for people who cannot or should not or prefer not to drive, and that BC Transit starts thinking bigger, so they're not just thinking about individual cities. Now here's an interesting detail. BC Transit operates transit service in about 36 cities throughout the province.
Yes.
So those neighborhoods have some sort of bus service. But many of those towns, many of those communities, they don't have a connection to each other.
Well, that's where the Trail of Tears highway problem came in, when Indigenous people having to hitchhike down the road and bad things happening, right?
That's right. So that is an example that has gotten an awful lot of publicity, but I would argue that it isn't special to the Highway of Tears, and it isn't special to Indigenous women. It is a structural problem when somebody who cannot or should not drive, can't afford a car, or prefers, or is doing one of those many kinds of trips where you don't want your car there, that people should have public transit. It shouldn't be as a special project. We should look at the map, the highway map of British Columbia, and say every one of those highways, or at least every major highway, should have adequate quality public transportation. And there's no planning process to do this now.
How close is the BC government to embracing that kind of thinking?
So that's the interesting thing, is if you look at what the politicians promise, so what you would call, an example is what are called the mandate letters, the ministry mandate letters. So that's the premier telling the various ministers of various agencies, various ministries, what their goals are. And inevitably it says we want more multimodal transportation, we want more environmental transportation, we want more affordable transportation,
right,
we want more services in rural areas, we want to take care of seniors, all the right stuff. But I don't see it, we don't see it being implemented at the agency level. So the Ministry of Transportation and BC Transit are not as far as I know, they are not developing any process to establish any planning process. So they would identify, where is there a gap? Where do we need public transportation to connect communities? And how are we going to fund it? They've waited for private companies to fill those gaps, and the private companies, they don't make enough profit. So it does require some kind of coordination and subsidy. And there just isn't a mechanism for it right now.
So the Tofino bus is probably an exception, because so many young dudes want to go to Tofino just to do surfing and that sort of stuff, that they keep going, that bus.
There are private companies that fill the gaps, but it's limited and seasonal and expensive.
Right,
so if you do Google search and you ask, is there a bus between, say, Victoria and Tofino, it'll say yes. And then it will report the peak season frequency.
Right.
So it'll give you the impression that there's at least one bus and maybe 2 or 3 buses a day, but then you look it up for today, and it turns out no, the service only runs once a week this time of year.
When I lived in England, the private sector had a very rich bus service between the cities, because a lot of people living in those cities. Right. But I was struck once when the bus between Heathrow Airport and the other airport nearby, and this is a regular bus, but the seating is really comfortable. You've got a little table. Sometimes you've got seats facing each other, so you can have a nice conversation. You've got orange juice being served, and you've got Wi-Fi connections. I thought, this is how all transit could be.
It's a premium. That's right, and it costs almost nothing more.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, 80% of the cost of bus service is the labor, and another 10% or so is the vehicle, another 10% is fuel. Adding things like onboard Wi-Fi, or having little fold-down work tables,
or a drinks holder and stuff like that.
Holder. The incremental cost is almost insignificant. It would pay for itself if it attracts, say, 10% more riders.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of bus services that do position themselves as the premium.
Yeah.
It's just that right now we want, the tendency is to think, well, public transit is a service, so let's be stingy about it. We can't have it be attractive. But if we want to solve transportation problems, then it definitely needs to be attractive. We need to think in terms of quality service. That means convenient, nice waiting areas, nice vehicles, things like onboard Wi-Fi service, convenient information.
Well, the bus stations used to exist when I first came to Victoria. You'd have
That's
a waiting room. Now you're just standing on the street.
Exactly.
But look, we've only got a minute to wrap up with, and I want to ask you personally, what drives you to do this work? What's your inner values that makes you love this work so much?
Well, I enjoy seeing the world improved. In my professional work, I am very aware of gaps in the system and ways that we could be doing better in terms of day-to-day life, making more walkable communities, more bikeable communities, a nicer public transit experience, more affordable housing. It's really, as a planner, I'm working on the practical application of the kind of goals, the big goals like affordability and inclusivity and fairness and health. There are ways that we can apply them in our communities. It does require some rethinking about our priorities.
So this gets back to where we came in with the joy of being in a community when you can walk around, cycle around, not have to earn a gazillion dollars to buy a private car, and meet people and build that social wealth. Right?
That's right. So the market research is very clear. A lot of people who are currently living automobile-dependent lifestyles, the only housing they can find is in a sprawled location. Many of them would much prefer living in a walkable urban neighborhood.
And I know from the Copenhagen experience where they're all cycling, that cycling makes you happier, right?
That's right. So
anyway, and this has been great, Todd. There's so much to unpack here, but we need to wrap up. Time doesn't stop on us, right? So my name's Guy Dauncey. You've been watching Change the World. My guest has been Todd Litman. Thanks for watching and have a good day.